So, you want to be a real estate investor, but where do you start? How do you know what information and sources to trust? That's where I come in. I'm Jonny Cattani, and this is the Investor Relations Real Estate Podcast. Hey guys, real quick, before we start, go to investwithcattani.com and download my free ebook, Is Commercial Real Estate Recession Proof? Now to today's show. What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Investor Relations Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Jonny Cattani, and I'm joined today by Todd Palmer. Todd Palmer is an executive coach, keynote speaker, renowned thought leader, author, and CEO who is committed to helping business owners tackle their obstacles and clear their path to success. As an entrepreneur and active CEO, Todd knows the struggles business owners face regarding people, cash, strategy, and execution. He took his company from being $600,000 in debt to making the Inc. 5000 as one of America's fastest growing companies, an astounding 6 times. Todd is also author of the #1 international Amazon bestseller, From Suck to Success, A Guide to Extraordinary Entrepreneurship. He specializes in helping leaders join the mission statement of the organization with their personal core values while addressing fears, self-doubts, and imposter syndrome. He brings a unique blend of authenticity, transparency, and vulnerability to his help leaders and organizations achieve their highest goals. And he's here today to share his story, what he's learned along the way, and his proven framework for helping business owners achieve success. Todd, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. We're very excited to have you. Before we jump into it, I'm very excited for today's conversation. I know we have a lot of young entrepreneurial listeners. Well, I'll say that 5 times fast. Let's go back to the beginning. Were you kind of born an entrepreneur at heart, or, where did you start and what led you where you're at?
Great question. I was, sometimes I think I was, and sometimes I think I wasn't. My first quote unquote job is I grew up in a very small town. I had 42 kids in my graduating class. We're talking middle of mid Michigan. And when I was there was like one party store. We used to drive by that party store, and I would take the $5 I got from mowing the lawn, and I would go in and buy like 700 fireballs, whatever, for 5 cents a piece. And then I take them to school that on Monday, and I start flipping them for 25 cents a piece. And that's kind of where it started for me. It's like, well, there's a need in the marketplace. Kids need fireballs, right? Well, there's a supply chain breakdown because you can't buy fireballs back because we didn't have in-store schools then. So I thought, I'm going to solve a problem in the marketplace. And then I got brought into the school principal's office, and they said, well, we think you're taking advantage of kids. And, being the wise, learned young man that I was, said, well, they drive past the same store I drive past. I don't understand. My mom's like, yeah, I don't really understand what the problem is, but I couldn't sell my fireballs anymore. But that would have been 6th grade, 7th grade. So that's my first foray into being an entrepreneur. But after that, I really thought I was going to be a journalist. I love to write, wrote my book, wrote 2 books. And I really thought that was going to be my path to success. Then from there, I thought, well, being a journalist is fun, but it's an awful long hours. You know what? I really think, and I was doing well in university in some of my classes. You know what? I'd really love to be a teacher. So I taught college for 2 years before I took my entrepreneurial journey. So it wasn't like I woke up one day at 12 years old, like you see these kids on Shark Tank. I invented a better beeswax mousetrap kind of thing, and said, I'm going to go become an entrepreneur. My journey was a little different.
Right on. I love that. That's funny. The principal is like, no, you can't do that here.
Yeah, you're taking advantage of kids, like the supply and demand.
Come on, it's simple economics principle. Let's go.
Yeah.
That's a great story. So you kind of did a little bit of everything. The teaching probably lended itself to where you're at now, I would imagine. So you wrote the book, had some real struggles, almost had to declare bankruptcy in your business there. So kind of talk about that, I guess. Let's start at the bottom, right? And we'll work our way up, right? So I think one thing entrepreneurs, at least for me in my business, I know my girlfriend and hers, is, when to start taking on debt, what that looks like in order to take on debt and growing with that. So kind of talk about that, and we'll go from there.
Well, it's interesting, especially as I work with entrepreneurs and CEOs now. I'm coaching 20 CEOs. It's an interesting blend around risk tolerance and what do you think debt is, and how do you structure your debt? and the selectivity around choosing your debt. I got into debt. It's embarrassing to say I got into debt through ignorance and stupidity. I didn't know what I didn't know. And I always thought, well, I'll sell my way out of it. And I was very much focused and driven to get to a certain revenue number. And now I've learned revenue is vanity, profits are sanity, right? And I was driving towards that revenue because I own a staffing company, a company called Diversified Industrial Staffing. It was based in Detroit. And we serviced at one point a lot of manufacturing companies, a lot of general labor, unskilled labor who couldn't necessarily get a job. So we helped them get a job, and they were on my payroll. And I didn't know what I didn't know. So I'm like 9 years into my journey, and I had this client who's my biggest client. And boom, one day they just stopped using us. And like, well, we were, our scores were solid, our customer service was on point, and they owed me almost $250,000 because I didn't realize that I thought I was a staffing company, but in the eyes of my customer, I was their bank. And they were having some financial troubles, and they discharged that $250,000 to me in bankruptcy. I never collected it. And the way staffing works is the employee's mine. I cannot not pay him or her. So I had to pay the wages. I had to pay the taxes. So immediately I'm $250,000 in debt because I couldn't collect. Then I'm trying to dig out of that hole. I'm taking on more debt. More clients are struggling. It's right at the beginning of the recession in 2006. So I got into debt because I didn't know any better. That's the first problem. So ignorance is not an excuse necessarily. Second issue I had is I really had massive imposter syndrome. I thought I had to be all things to all people on all topics all the time. And I thought I had to wear a Superman cape and fly around my office and be big and 10 foot tall and bulletproof, when really I was a scared little boy because I didn't really know how to read my finances, and I couldn't read a cash flow statement. And my P&L was all messed up. And it really came to roost in September of 2006 when the bank called and said, hey, you owe us $600,000 in debt. And you have a $2 million staffing company. You just lost your biggest client. We want our money. And I said, I don't have it. I said, that's okay. We'd be happy to take your house because you put up your personal guarantee, put up your collateral. And I went home and I was a mess. I was a single dad. So it was just my son and I. And I'm talking to him about, he goes, how was your day? I don't really want to hear, you want to hear this story? Go, no, Dad, how was your day? And I told him the bank story and thinking I'm going to get, oh, Dad, it'll be okay. It'll be fine. I get, no, this is your fault. You need to fix this. I don't want to go live in a tent in the backyard. Okay. So I went to bed that night and didn't get out of bed for 3 days. That's how bad my depression was. That's how bad my itty bitty shitty committee in my head was meeting on 600,000 reasons why I sucked. Finally woke up, said, I'm finally going to ask for help, and I hired a coach. Within 7 years, we paid off all that debt, restructured the company, changed my market focus, taught me how to read finances because I don't know what I'm doing was a lot of the conversations we had. And he would laugh at me and say, well, it pretty much explains how you got in bad shape because you didn't know what you didn't know, right? 7 years later, paid off all the debt. And as you talked about, we hockey stick that business and made the Inc. 5000 6 times in 7 years as one of America's fastest growing companies. And I used to be so embarrassed to tell that story because my shame and my guilt, and again, the itty bitty shitty committee would meet a lot. And I realized that my mess now has become my message because now when I'm coaching other CEOs, I'm hoping to help them not suffer those slings and arrows that I took based upon my ignorance.
Wow. That's quite the story. And I can certainly see why that's the kind of the foundation of everything you have now, because that's a struggle, right? And I think so many people can relate to that. And, I've talked about this, how important it is to have a coach and understand that you really can't do it all on your own, despite what you may think. So it obviously starts with mindset, right? Really change that mindset, understanding that mindset. But once we understand that, where do we go, right? What's the best way to move forward in terms of setting things up correctly so that we can learn from that and not get in that same hole?
Well, great. Those are all great things to consider. And I remember, I worked with 2 coaches. My first coach was named Greg. My second coach is named Dr. Danny Friedman. And with Greg and I, we worked a lot on the business. We worked a lot on the structure, focusing on the margin, learning KPIs, learning how to hold people accountable. I was very much afraid to not be liked. Like, I want to be liked by my people, and I'm their boss. I'm not their friend. I can be friendly with them, and there's different ways to handle that, but I wouldn't hold anybody accountable, including myself. So again, inside out leadership, you can't lead others until you can lead yourself. So did a lot of work with Greg around leading the company, getting it there. But then what I discovered and found was I wasn't necessarily that satisfied in running the company. I felt there was more to accomplish, more to do. So that's when I hired Dr. Friedland, who was a neuroscientist, and he taught me how my brain works. And I went to San Diego. I met him at a conference. I said, I'd like you to work with me. Brings me out to San Diego where he lived, and he puts me in an MRI tube. And he starts asking me different questions, and I'm watching different parts of my brain fire as I answer. And he said, you answer a lot of your questions from the lowest functioning part of your brain. You answer them from the fight or flight part of your brain and your amygdala. If we can move you to give answers and do self-talk, as well as talk to your team from your higher neocortex, you're going to enjoy life more. You're going to be more successful as an entrepreneur, as well as, and for me, that was the most important thing, I'm going to be a more successful human being and a successful partner and parent. So I realized that, fixing the business is one thing, but fixing myself and how I showed up in the world and how I interacted with people was interesting, because we did a lot of work and we figured out that a lot of the decisions I made as an entrepreneur between the ages of 27 and 45, I didn't make them as an adult. I made them as a child. Let me tell you why. Because at 5 years old, I had a very traumatic experience. At 5 years old, my dad passed away. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She had to go to work. My older brother got an athletic scholarship, went from Michigan to Kentucky, and my older sister moved from Michigan to Arizona to be with her new husband. So within 90 days, my entire support system was gone. And as a 5-year-old, I told myself that I'm abandoned. As a 5-year-old, I told myself I'm not worthwhile. So what do I want to do? I want to be safe. And if I want to be safe, how do I do that? I rely solely on myself. Great skill set if you want to be a startup entrepreneur, when you have to do HR and sales and ops and accounting and all those departments. But when you want to scale the company like I wanted to, I was my own glass ceiling. So I give that speech, and I realize, you guys, the person running the company wasn't 45-year-old me. It's 5-year-old me. And I'll pop up a little cute picture of me when I was 5. I'm like, that guy's in charge. And they all laugh. I said, yeah, I should have laughed too, because we should all be concerned that a 5-year-old runs our businesses. But that's a lot of what happens for entrepreneurs and for leaders, is we operate from outdated thinking. We operate from an outdated narrative, and we've got to move from that lower thinking to that higher thinking to be more successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I can absolutely relate to that. I know plenty of entrepreneurs who can as well. My first mentor was my grandfather, and RIP. He was a great man. Jack Johnson, created a huge construction company, still in the family actually. But he always said, if you want things done right, you got to do it yourself. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. All the classic one-liners that really are just, we've proven are absolutely not true when it comes to running and starting and ultimately scaling business. Like you mentioned in the beginning, yes, you have to wear a lot of hats, right? But ultimately, when you get to that scaling point, you have to start spreading those hats out. So as you do so, one thing, I was actually listening to a podcast, and this guy was talking about how he started hiring people, and he hired people he liked. And his coach was like, these are the wrong people for the job. Right? Like,
yeah, I can relate.
Yeah. Right. And that makes total sense. Like you mentioned, you want to be liked, So where do we kind of draw that line and establish that as we start scaling to where we're still likable? Of course, we don't want people to fear us. We want to be approachable, but also kind of set that boundary that, hey, I am in charge, and kind of those steps.
For sure. So I call those rules of engagement. What is the rules of engagement in our relationship, and what's our upfront contract going to be? Well, if you're going to have a contract with somebody, well, we've got to know the boundaries of that contract and the rules within that contract. So if I'm hiring you to come work for me and do sales, well, how am I going to measure you? Excuse me. What are your daily KPIs going to be? What are your weekly activity metrics going to be? We talk about that in the upfront interview. And because people can be really good at being interviews and they want to be liked, and we want them to be likable, we then have to take it a step further, and we have to look under the hood. So I use products like Color Code and Myers-Briggs and Colby and all the diagnostics to fit the job, because I've realized and learned certain personality types and certain personality traits fit certain jobs. I'm a big fan of colorcode.com. It's 4 colors, and it goes from red to blue to yellow to white. Your reds are often typically your more rigid thinkers, just from a simplicity standpoint, where your whites are more your visionary thinkers. Well, if I have an accounting department, I need a staff and I need to hire a CFO. I'm not really sure I want to hire someone in the color code mantra in a white who's all visionary and only sees opportunity and possibility. I think we need someone who can hold a little bit more of a feet to the fire, a little more governor on the finances. I want to hire me a blue or a red. So you take a look at that and you measure against that, but also, so what are the KPIs? What are our rules of engagement? What's under the hood? As well as how do you fit my culture? My culture is king for me. When I started hiring to my culture, what I figured out was I could hire for DNA, not for resume. And I could teach you to be a good recruiter. I couldn't teach you to be a good human being. Good is a subjective tool. Good fits me, maybe good for me is maybe not good for you. But for my business, I was very clear and I knew what our North Star was. We were in business to improve lives. We did it through a recruiting mechanism where we're basically matchmakers. I got a company, I got a candidate, I put them together, we get paid. A lot of recruiting companies are like, how do I get paid? How do I get paid? How do I get paid? I'm gonna put those round pegs in those square holes. We found that I wanted to hire people who had a certain set of core values that would follow into our improved life system, that would focus on the candidate and the client, putting them together so we could get paid. Once we figured that model out, then we were able to hire against that model, lay out the clear KPIs, the clear success metrics, so people knew every week whether they were doing well or not.
Wow. I love that. That's an incredible structure. And is that something we should implement right from the beginning?
I wish I would have. I probably would have got $600,000 in debt. I think knowing that and knowing your business, and if you I was mentioning to you a minute ago that I've got a client that I coach. He owns multiple Airbnbs, and we've created a process and a system for him to run the Airbnbs. We've created a process and a system for cleaning them out, maintenance, all these things, so he can look. He could be on a beach in Florida, look at his metrics on a Friday. Hey, we won here, we lost here, we're off target here. Because what's the one of the things we look out for him is what is the clean up? How many hours does it take to clean a place? And he's like, hey, we could be more efficient in the area. Instead of taking 3 hours, if we cut that to 2.5 hours, that we pick up this and we move this, and the quality is higher. Because he found, but basically the staff was kind of moving at about half speed. I mean, it was clean, it met standards. If their standards of cleanliness and quality were high, they were met. It was the efficiency that could be improved. Once we diagnosed that, he created efficiency metrics, gave them to his managers, and they held against that. And then if people got things done and they checked all the boxes for quality and efficiency, and they got it done in under a certain amount of time, they actually received a bonus. So they're
Okay.
incentivized to work harder, more effectively, not to break your back per se, but more effectively to get things done. Because if we measure not just the result, but the activity to create the result, there's a lot of things that can be improved.
Wow. That's awesome and powerful for sure. Because a lot of people, and of course you don't want to micromanage, right? Nobody ever does. Nobody wants to be micromanaged. And so, there's kind of that balance of, as long as the work gets done, it gets done, great. That's all that matters in the end. But I think a lot of people kind of overlook the process to getting it done. And like you mentioned, that efficiency. So that can be something that's hard to establish, right? Because if it is getting done and it's getting done right, then,
Yeah. Well, I always say to my leaders 2 things. People respect what the boss inspects, and trust but verify. So if you've got a crew out there and they're working on an Airbnb, well, pop in, see how quickly they're moving. Maybe watch them for a day, time them. Um, we have no problem in our society measuring athletes. What is your NFL combine? What's your 40 time? How much can you bench press? We measure people like that. But when it comes to our businesses, we seem to take offense, or we have employees who become offended when we measure their activities. And that person may not be a good fit for your culture if your culture is about creating high performance experiences for your customer. So if you've got people who are complaining versus in the interview, bringing people in, sharing with them, this is what a successful employee looks like to us. Here's here's our reward system. Here's our bonus structure. Here's our attaboy program. I've got one client, the first day they show up at the office, the new employee shows up at the office, they get a welcome basket. The spouse also gets a welcome basket. and it's a customized welcome basket that he learns in the interview about Johnny and about Susie. So Johnny gets, chocolates and I don't know, baseball tickets. The wife gets a bottle of her favorite wine and flowers. So when you guys come home together, you have a conversation about your new employer. But everything's
Wow.
customized to fit who you are. So everybody feels special, cool, and unique. And so that when you have to work weekends and your wife says, hey, your company really supports our family because they measure the work product you produce, not necessarily just the hours you put in. It can be, it can, the first and foremost thing, it creates longevity and loyalty in a world right now where you have the great resignation, the great reshuffle.
Yeah, that's wow. That's a really awesome point there, and really great perspective, which can be hard to kind of see and understand for sure. And kind of along those lines of the shortage and everything that's going on, what are you seeing as kind of the reason for that, and where we might be headed?
Oh, it's the world of work has completely changed. It is a candidate driven world. And if you're an employer and you can't find people, chances are you might want to start looking in the mirror because it's probably you. Because the number one reason people leave a company is because the owner or the direct manager. They also, what they miss out is the number one source for the next great employee is their current employees. So you can do a lot of in-house recruiting. I've got one client, for example, who took an analysis. They spent about $1,000 for an Indeed ad on the internet. He's now offering that $1,000 bonus to his internal employees for every referral that gets hired. So he's still spending the same $1,000. But if you think about it, if Todd refers John, I'm going to back John. I'm not going to refer an idiot. I'm going to refer a friend of mine who's going to be a producer because he's a reflection of me. And then what he was, and this is sheer brilliance, he also gave John that same $1,000 sign-on bonus. So I get $1,000 and you get $1,000 to go work for this guy. And he's basically solved most of his recruiting problems. Now he's in a heavy populated area. There's plenty of people to choose from. But he found that if he went to his staff, they understood his core values, what success looked like, and then they brought in a friend, the person knows what they're getting into. They know what they're signing up for, and they've got a buddy to have lunch with. I mean, all these little small things. But at the end of the day, we have 5 to 7 million more job openings than we have people for in the United States. So it's going to be a candidate-driven market for the foreseeable future. Even when a recession does hit, and there will be layoffs during that recession, the numbers are still going to honor those piece. The other piece I would tell you too is pay attention to is if you can measure or create a situation where you offer flexibility and freedom for an employee, and they're able to work different hours remotely, what have you, and you measure not the hours they put in, but the work product they produce, it can be game changing. My son's a CPA. He recently started his own CPA practice because his employer was really giving him a hard time because he wouldn't work on Saturdays. And he said, well, wait a minute. I'm putting 50 hours in Monday through Friday. I want my weekends off. And I can show you and measure for you, I'm producing more tax returns than anybody else in the department. So I'm producing more than my coworkers who are going to come in on Saturday. And does it really matter when I do the work if you're getting the result you want? Ultimately, it caused him to become an entrepreneur, and I'm super proud of him. But he would have stayed if the employer would have seen the work product produced, not the hours he can see the person physically sitting in his office as the number one driver for decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's certainly where we're headed, I think, with my generation, is very much about that sort of freedom and empowerment, right? It's important to empower your employees, let them know that you hire them and yes, you're in charge, but this is you're in charge of your role. Like, this is your own little mini company here. Your job is your own little mini thing that you do. And it's up to you to kind of, figure that out to a certain extent, right? And do it correctly, like you mentioned. So kind of along those lines, I want to talk about, kind of get to this last piece of execution, right? Talk to a ton of coaches, business people, entrepreneurs, and they all say, and I say the same thing, taking action, right? That's ultimately what's going to get us to making those mistakes and learning, and of course the success hopefully will follow. What are some keys to that execution to make sure that we're doing it effectively and efficiently, and not wasting our own time, and minus our employees, like our own execution?
Yep. So I'll take a slightly different approach that maybe some of your other guests haven't considered. I look at the brain science behind the execution piece and what prevents us from executing. And like you said, it's getting started. And people will often say, well, once I get motivated, then I'm going to get started. I want to get into real estate. And when I get motivated, I'm going to buy my first rental property. Here's the reality. And this is what Dr. Friedland taught me, is motivation is a result of action. And we get sucked into the Disney world or the Hollywood superhero world. When I get motivated, then I'm going to take action. You got to take the action first. And then you realize, so the first thing is take action to get motivated, because the result of that action will create more motivation. Just that simple. If you bomb and you buy a dog piece of real estate, well, now you've learned a valuable lesson. Second part of it is around imposter syndrome, is to not get wrapped up in failure. Failure is nothing more than a word in the dictionary. I was massively worried about the fear of failure, the fear of failure, the fear of failure. And I tried things and it wouldn't work the first time. And Danny said to me one day, he's like, talk about the fearing failure a lot. What if you reframe failure and remove the word failure and insert the word learning? Are you willing to learn forward versus fail forward? Because even the word fail forward still has a negative connotation in your brain. And I'm like, tell me more. He goes, if you try something and it doesn't work and you learn from it and you try it going forward differently, did you ever really fail? In fact, I've got that mantra sitting in my house here because it mattered so much to me, because I was so afraid of failing. Because psychologically, if the business failed or if an attempt at something failed, that meant I was a failure. He said that, going back to your grandfather, that's outdated thinking. It's a narrative that doesn't. He goes, the brain science is very clear around this. Watch, again, Danny Friedland, Joe Dispenza. It's very clear. We assign the failure to it. Because I tried something and I learned. You wouldn't tell your kid the first time he tries to walk, oh, you fell down, you suck, you failed. But you would say that to yourself, well, I tried this new sport and I suck and I failed, or I tried this new business venture and I failed. Well, what did you learn from it? The key becomes to learn quickly, fail forward quickly. You see this a lot in the tech space, in the IT space. They're always trying new things. I mean, I just got a brand new update on my phone this morning. They're constantly, it's an update, but really, aren't they just fixing things they didn't get right the first time? That's what it comes down to. So if we can, I would leave your audience with take action to result in motivation, and recognize that failure, if you replace failure with learning, the journey will be a whole lot more enjoyable and you'll be much kinder to yourself.
Wow. Wow. That's powerful. I love that so much. And I'm absolutely going to change my internal dialogue. Because before this, I was at a tech company, got laid off because of COVID. That led to this, ultimately worked out for the best. But the only thing that I agreed with our VP of sales on was fail fast, fail forward. Of course, he learned that, so on. But, we sort of celebrated them almost, right? We had a Slack channel, you type it in, and every week we voted on the worst one. And then they got I think it was like 10 or $20 for like lunch.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well,
So very much promoting that, because that means you're learning. Or trying, I guess, probably you're trying. Hopefully you're learning from that.
Yeah. Well, and I love what you said. I think it's important that your audience hears you share this experience you've had. So you're at a tech company and you got laid off, and it's the best thing. You said something like it's for the better, for the best. When we can really embrace something happening for us and not to us, we stay in the higher neurocortex. Danny Friedland, my coach, my mentor, he wrote the foreword to my book and I wrote the epilogue of my book, because he was diagnosed with cancer, and 11 months later he was gone. Within 48 hours of being diagnosed with cancer, he decided cancer was happening for him, not to him. In that space, he created over 300 pieces of content in less than a year, because he goes, the rest of my life will be the best of my life. So wow. I share that with you and your audience today, because you can take any situation, losing a job. How does it happen for me, not to me? Getting cancer. How does it happen for me, not to me? Because he goes, I thought I had a 20-year runway. Yeah, I don't. I mean, imagine being a world-leading neuroscientist who understands how the brain works, getting a brain cancer. It's not like you and I going in, well, doc, what can I do? Or how can I negotiate with death and yada, yada, yada. The reality is, he goes, I knew what I had and I knew basically how much time I had left. I grieved, I mourned. 48 hours later, that's when he called me and said, will you help me with this initiative about making things happen for you, not to you, and creating more content? Because we have the power of choice when we have the awareness. So I love what you said. It's like, hey, I lost this job. It really served me well. Here's why it served me well. And I decided, really in your own version of it, it happened for you, not to you.
Wow. That's incredible insight. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know the listeners will be grateful for that as well, because when things are, that's obviously the hardest time, right? And I love that he set aside or took 48 hours. I think that's important too, is sometimes when you're feeling sad is almost setting like, okay, I'm going to be sad for, whatever the degree is, right? If it's something not that, being like, okay, for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to be sad. And then I'm going to be done being sad. Or, hey, I'm going to be sad for a day,
Yeah.
Whereas
in that day, ask yourself, hey, this really sucks. Okay. I feel like garbage. Why is this happening for me, not to me? And it's called a generative question. When you ask a generative question, it generates more. And 85% of your learning happens in your subconscious. So you don't even have to have the responsibility of muscling your way through and thinking it. Yeah, yes, take the time to mourn. Why is this happening for me? Why is this happening for me?
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you so much for that. Well, as we kind of wind down here, I do have 5 questions I ask all of my guests. It's the final 5. First question, best advice you've gotten from a mentor?
Danny Friedland, ask yourself why it's happening for you, not to you. Greg, he would say margin over vanity, or margin over revenue, because revenue is vanity, profits are sanity.
Wow, I've never heard that before. That's incredible. What is it about your career that makes you feel like you're fulfilling your why?
So my why is improve lives. I worked with 2 years with Simon Sinek to figure that out. And what helps me feel like I'm living up to my why is I've realized that my why is about other people. And when a client has a breakthrough moment, a light bulb moment, or I was talking to a kid the other day at the grocery store, and his eyes just flash like, oh, that's really, like, that makes me, the story I tell myself is I've improved that young man's life, or I've improved the CEO's life, and I can do it anywhere I go. It's portable and it's not dependent upon anybody else. It gives me such a feeling of accomplishment.
Wow, I love that. That's so awesome. Favorite, are you in real estate also? The question is favorite non-real estate or investment related books. So I guess kind of self-help business, something along those lines. Shameless plug for your own.
Well, no, certainly. Yeah. My book, From Start to Success. I'll be happy to, but and I credit him in my book. I'm a big fan of Mark Manson. And Mark Manson's an acquired taste, and he wrote a book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Blank.
Yep, I love that book.
But when you pull back all the profanity and the interesting stories, his content is rock solid. His methodology is really well researched, and it's kind of got that rock star appeal of being, cutting edge and a little edgy for folks. But when you take a look at things like the law of avoidance, which is why people never get started, and things like that, I think his content is super, super solid. And for young people especially, it really lands with them well.
Absolutely. I love that. Such a great book. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Oh, wow. If I could have any superpower, what would it be? I would have the superpower of self-awareness at all times.
Gosh, that would be nice, right?
It saved me a lot of hassle.
Honestly, man, that's definitely the biggest thing that you kind of work towards is that self-awareness for sure. Cool. Well, last one, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you and learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. Happy to talk to anybody who's listening. I'm happy to give you an hour of my time for free. You can reach me at todd@extraordinaryadvisors.com. If you go to my website for my book, from suck to success.com, put in your email address, I'll send you a free chapter of the book. And again, thank you so much for having me on the show today.
Todd, I really cannot thank you enough. This has been incredible insight. And you know what, even if the listeners aren't happy, which I know they will be, I am very, very grateful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching today's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. Listen, I know it's cliche and you hear it all the time, but please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you know when the next video is coming out. Even though this is technically a daily podcast, you know it's coming out the next day. We have a ton of content coming your way. So please like and subscribe. It helps a ton. Leave comments. Would love to know what you guys think. And we will see you on the next one. Thanks so much.